Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another episode. This time on the podcast, we have Nipun Gupta. Welcome to the podcast, Nipun.
Thank you, Yash.
So this is the thing that we do on the show, right? So I'm horrible with introductions, right? So what I do is I let the guests introduce themselves and then we sort of get into the meat of the conversation. So before we begin, we'll be talking about a couple of things. We'll be talking about product, we'll be talking about VCs, we'll be talking about AI. And Nipun himself is like a 2x entrepreneur as well. So we'll be talking about his journey. And yeah, so before we begin, Nipun Gupta, please introduce yourself.
Cool. So I'll start from the beginning. So I was born in Meerut, right? But grew up in different cities because my father worked for a bank, so he kept getting transferred all his life. And so I was schooled in different cities, starting from Meerut, then 4 years in Bangalore, then in Banaras for 3 years, a couple of years in Bhopal. Then I went to Kota to prepare for JEE, a couple of years there. Went to IIT Roorkee, did my BTech from IIT Roorkee, graduated in 2012. And since then, it's been 11 years since I've been working. For a significant part of my career, I think more than half of my career, I've been a founder. Started 2 companies in the past. The first company that I founded, ran that for 1 year, 3 months, and then shut it down because of certain reasons that I can talk about later. The second company that I founded, I ended up selling that to Paytm in 2018. Apart from that, the rest half of my career, I've worked in tech product roles in companies like Paytm, Policybazaar, and Niyam. And I've been in the VC industry now for around 2.5 years, and so far loving it. It's interesting to be on the other side of the table to understand how VC decisions are made. So I think this is a brief journey of mine.
Interesting. So you mentioned that you studied at IIT and you prepared in Kota, right? So talk me through that. How was that? How was Kota like? Like, would you go back again? Like, if you had to like do it all over again? Like, do you think that was worth it? Like studying in Kota?
No. Okay. So yes, I think it's heavily dependent on the individual. I wouldn't go personally, right? Because I was always a bright student, right? But the thing with me was, I've always been someone who learns himself. Like, I'm very bad with instructions. If you tell me this is how you need to do something, I'm very bad with that, right? Most of the learning that I have, that I've been able to do in my life, has been through my own process, right? So I think I would have cracked a better rank. I would have cracked JEE in my first attempt rather than the second attempt if I had studied in my hometown. Right? And the problem with Kota is, Kota can work for a lot of people. It's not someone like me, right? The problem with Kota is it's a lot. You're part of the process. You're structured. You're taught like a lot of people, right? And if you're not that person, it becomes difficult. And apart from that, I don't think cutting yourself off from the rest of the world for 2 years to prepare for exam is very healthy. So I don't know. I wouldn't recommend it. But having said that, there are some good things as well of my when I was in Kota. I think it really humbled you because you are amongst a lot of people who have a very high chance of cracking JEE, and there is this competitive atmosphere which really drives you also. So that can work. But again, I wouldn't. So.
Very interesting. So how was IIT, right? Because IIT Roorkee is one of the best colleges in India, right? So what did you study there? And like, if you think about it like now, like how good is it? Like, have you gone back to IIT Roorkee and looked at the things, how they are? Like, do you like how things are going or do you don't? Like, how is it like?
So my rank was 4189. Okay, 4118. So when you get a rank, especially in 2008, when I entered into IIT, when you get a rank like that, you don't have a lot of choices when it comes to the old 7 IITs that you had, right? So there were around, I think, 5,500 to 6, I think not more than 6,000 general category seats, right? And I wanted to be with one of the old IITs, although I wanted to go to IIT Delhi. But I was getting mostly, 5-year courses, dual degree courses in IIT Delhi or Bombay. So the best thing that I wanted a 4-year course, and what I got at the 4-year that I got was pulp and paper technology at IIT Roorkee. And there are, so
Very
don't know if
interesting.
you must have heard of it. Yeah, the first time, right?
I haven't. Yeah, exactly. I haven't heard of pulp and technology. Like, is it something to do with printing and like how papers are made, or like no?
Yeah, related to not printing, paper, right? How papers
Interesting.
are made, right? So there are a lot of very weird branches in IITs. There is textile engineering, there is paper technology, then there is food and agriculture, right? All of these branches exist in IIT, which makes like no sense at all. So it's basically the first years was chemical engineering, and then the third and the fourth year was specific to paper technology, right? I had absolutely no interest in it, right?
Yeah.
Absolute interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was in a very different mindset. I had cleared JEE, and I was like, I've worked really hard in my life. Now, now I'm not going to study, right? I was in a very chill phase of my life. I was discovering everything apart from my course curriculum at IIT.
Interesting.
That's how I put it, right?
Walk me
I
through
was-
that. What things were you experiencing then?
So I was like really into movies, man. I
Interesting.
like movies became my thing. They were my education at IIT, right? I watched I think almost all top 250 IMDb movies. Discovered the work of directors like Tarantino, Stanley Kubrick, Martin Scorsese, right? It really like hooked me, right? And then I started reading a lot. Read about almost every topic under the sun, from history to physics, which I always like to read. A lot of things under the sun, right? So that was interesting. So I was like involved in that. I think that's it. That's pretty much it.
Interesting. So extrapolating from what you said a couple of minutes ago, you said that you had your own way of learning, right? And you didn't like people giving you instructions, like at least in terms of learning. So what's your way to learn? Let's say tomorrow you have to learn a new, let's say software, let's say a new skill. Like what's your way to approach that?
Right. So what I would do is, first of all, I would try and find something online, a course or some reading material that would basically structure how what I need to learn. Right. First, structure what I need to learn, and then I'll go at my own pace from level 0 to level X. Right. And the idea is, as I would go doing that, as I would go across levels, I would also want to apply myself. Because I think if you're learning something and not applying that, you tend to forget, and it doesn't work, right? So if I learn a concept, it's very important for me to apply that concept, right? So that's how the learning process for me works.
Interesting. So this is, I think, back before the JEE era, right? So how has the learning internet changed from then to now? Because now if I want to learn anything, I can just I'll find a zillion courses. I can go on Perplexity if I want to learn some physics concept. If I want to learn some language, I can just go on YouTube. So how accessible were those like things back in the day? Like how did people learn then, and how do people like learn now? Let's take tech into consideration.
Yeah, it's very different now. When I was studying, there were it was very difficult to find an online course through which you can learn from. And even if you could find something online that you can learn from, the bandwidths in our country didn't allow us to stream anything, right? So there was that. So when I say, even then I would still prefer to learn at my own pace rather than going to mass market coaching, is because my nature is such that I really want to sit on a problem and figure out, break it down, and just solve it, right? And since not just when I was preparing for JEE, all my career as well, right? I have only excelled when I am driving things, when I am in the driver's seat, right? So I think it's in my nature. It could be different for a lot of people.
That's very interesting. So let's jump into once how you broke into VC. So before that, let's talk about your entrepreneurship experiences and whatnot. So another just question is, because you didn't like being given instructions, is that why you decided to start a company once you left IIT?
No, yes.
Not really?
So yeah, so I'll tell you how it happened. Since when I was in IIT, I was like, for the first couple of years, I was not at all interested in studying, and I was like, okay, I'll just pass. That's it. I just need passing grades. I'll be fine, right? In the third year of IIT, we had this, some of our seniors, right? Some of our seniors who cracked IIM and who were working at McKinsey and Bain came to the college and gave us some jnana on, how we should, think about our career going ahead. And I remember one consultant who was, IIT Roorkee, IIM Ahmedabad, and then McKinsey. He told all of us that, यार जो स्टड लोग हैं ना वो कंसल्टिंग में जाते हैं, right? So I was like,
interesting.
Yeah. So I was like, God, I was like, I thought I'm a self-proclaimed stud, so I should get into consulting. So that's when I thought, no, I would try for consulting. But then someone told me, unless you have a 7.5 to 8 pointer, the consulting companies who will visit it will not even look at it. Right? And I was a 6 pointer. So that was out, right? But my idea was
just sorry to interrupt, but why is that? Why was getting into consulting that glamorous, at least back in the day? Like, why was that?
Yeah, because I see, consultants are generally generalists, right? And the idea is that to be a good consultant, you have to be academically smart, but just that will not cut it. You need to have a well-rounded personality, right? You need to have some sales skills, right? And you need to have aptitude, intelligence, you need to have intellect, and you need to have street smartness, all three things to become a good consultant. That was the idea, at least, right?
Got it.
So, and I also found consultants to be really articulate and good communicators. That was kind of a tough, right? So that's why I thought I wanted to get into consulting, right? But when I figured out that it's not going to happen with someone like with the grades that I had, so my plan then basically morphed into, the idea was that I will get a non-coding job. I wanted to get into an analyst, data analyst or an analyst sort of a profile, work for 2-3 years, and then go for an MBA from an IIM or an Ivy League. That was the idea, right? But luckily, what happened? So I had a couple of campus placement offers. I sat for campus placement. I had a couple of offers, but I was also talking to some of my seniors, and I was able to connect to a startup which was based out of Mumbai, right? It's called Plans Edu Solutions, and the founders had just raised a seed amount of I think a couple of $1 million.
Interesting.
And I think not couple. I think
this was when, like
1.5.
2012, 2013.
2012, 2013. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and they wanted someone who could work with them as a generalist. Someone who could work across product, marketing, B2B alliances, a lot of things, right? And I just joined them. Right? They offered me more money, and I joined them. Right?
Interesting.
That's it. Right? And by accident, I joined the startup. I was not at all I had no aspirations to become an entrepreneur before joining the startup. And when I joined it, I thoroughly loved it. That 1 year of my tenure at that startup, when I was working very closely with the founders, I got to do everything. I got to do everything apart from writing code, right? So the breadth of things that I was working at in that startup, really, right? That's when I understood that this is something that I want to do for the last part of my career, right? This excites me, right? So after I worked there for 1 year. When I joined it, we were just three. There were 3 co-founders and me. And then when I left, it was a 60-member team, and we had a few products live, and we were getting revenues as well. So after that, I quit. After 1 year working there, I quit that job, and then I started my first startup. So that's how it happened.
Okay, so another question for what you just said, right? So do you think it's a good thing to first get into some form of a generalist role, like while starting a career, and then eventually figure out like what sort of excites you more, and then get into it completely? Because if someone just starts out as like a pure tech person, like just a pure coder, and it would be ideally it would be difficult to switch into some form of a generalist role or maybe some other role. So is it a good idea for a fresher to try for like generalist roles?
See, it depends. It depends on a bunch of factors, right? Number one, so if you're talking about basically your question is, before starting up, is it a good idea to directly start up out of college, or is it a better idea to first join a company as a generalist? Is that the question?
No. The question is like, while starting a career, like from the very get-go, is it a good idea to first get into generalist roles, or like one should try for specialized options? Like the specialized option, let's take tech for example. Like,
Okay, again, then depends on what is your long-term view. How do you want to orient your career? Do you want to be, let's say, a coder, or do you want to be a business product guy? Right. That would be my follow-up question.
okay, that's how okay, I'll push that to you. How did you orient your career back then? Like, because like as you said, like your choice was completely accidental. I mean, not accidental, but they gave you more money and you thought it'd be cool and you just took it and it was great.
Right.
So if you were currently a student, let's say fourth year, like 3 years elder to me, how would you approach, like how would you orient your career? Like what things one should keep in mind before thinking, okay, this is what I should do first, so that it's a good first step or like a head start?
So I think in the early stages of my career, I would recommend people to try as many things as they can before figuring out what they are best at, right? So I would recommend, if you're starting your career, you should prefer generalist roles. That helps because you're doing a bunch of things, right? So you can figure out what you're best at. That is one. Also, I think in the initial stages of your career, if you switch jobs more often than the later stages of your career, it's fine, right? So if let's say if I see someone has switched jobs in the first 5 years of their career a lot, that's not a red flag. That could be a very good thing, because that person is trying to explore, what he's good at, and is slightly restless and has some drive rather than being stuck in one place.
That's very interesting, because the same thing I've heard, like the complete opposite of that from folks in Bangalore. Because I think there's a huge attrition problem in tech startups in Bangalore. I think it's specifically to tech, because if someone from the tech side like leaves, it's difficult to find like a very good replacement for them, because the technologies they use, the APIs they use, so it will be difficult for a new person to sort of jump and fill the. Whereas I guess what you say it makes more sense. Like if someone's just starting
so it will always be it'll always be a problem, right, for the company. Let's say if you're switching, right? At the end of the day, you also have to be slightly selfish with your career, right? Especially in the initial stages of you have to figure out what you want, what you have to do, right? What you're really good at, right? What you want to do and what you're really good at. And if you don't try enough, you'll never know, right? Because you can't take the amount of risk you can take in your 20s or in the early stages of your career will be significantly higher as opposed to later stages of your career, right?
Very interesting.
So even when you're evaluating founders, right, and we see a founder who has switched, let's say 2-3 jobs, right, in their 20s or in the early stages of their career, we don't see that as a red flag unless we talk to the founder and we figure out what was the reason. We want to figure out, right, and we don't right away. That's how we see it.
That's very interesting. So another question I had was, because before we started the podcast, you sort of introduced yourself as like first you're like a founder first, then like a product guy, and then at last you mentioned that you're a VC. So how does like one structure that hierarchy once they're sort of past their like early career? Like how do you figure that out for yourself?
I'm sorry, I don't understand, Yash, what you're trying to ask me.
So as you said that you're initially, the first thing you are is like a founder, and then later on you're a product guy, and lastly you're a VC guy. How did you figure that out? Like what made you realize that you are first a founder and then at last a VC?
See, I'm a creative person. Like, I can talk from my perspective, right? I consider myself a creative person. I like the process of creation is very exciting to me, right? The part where you start something from scratch and build it and take it somewhere, that is very exciting, right? And you get that opportunity if you are a founder, if you're starting a company, if you're starting a startup, or in any other creative pursuit where you're creating something, right? It could be a movie, it could be you were writing a novel, or maybe, I don't know, painting something, or whatever it is. All these creative pursuits give you that opportunity. And that is the reason I think I'm founder first, because that's very close to me. That's in my nature. That's what I want to do for a large part of my career. Then comes product, because I think product and VC could be interchangeable, right? I'm definitely a founder first, right? Product and VC could be interchangeable. Right now, because product also gives you that opportunity to create something, right? Right. It might not be from scratch. Let's say if I'm working for a large company like Paytm, I might not be creating something from scratch, but I'm working at scaling things, right? So it's still giving you the opportunity to create something, right? And the beauty with product roles is product gives you this opportunity to really think deep, long, and hard, right? Product, how good of a product manager you are or a product person you are depends on your ability to think. Right? It's only limited by your ability to think. And that is what makes product exciting. Right? Now, finally, VC, right? I think a VC role is very fulfilling, or could be very fulfilling, is because you're working very closely with the founders.
Yeah.
You're right. And that's where it connects to being a founder first, right? If I'm not a founder, I would want to be very closely working with the founders.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So another question generally I had was there's an influx, or there's this I don't want to say the word hype, but there's this wave of interest for product roles in a bunch of startups, and there are a bunch of product internships coming up. Why is that? I'm pretty sure back in the day there were not a lot of product folks out there, or not a lot of product jobs out there, or people seeking product roles. Why is suddenly every startup have a proper product guy? Why is that happening?
See, what has happened with time in the past decade is that every company has become a product company, right? When I say product, I mean tech product company, right? Every company now has some digital footprint, right? Now Reliance is digital heavy, right? A decade back, you couldn't even imagine Reliance doing something in tech, correct?
Yeah.
Right? So when every company is a tech company, right? And to be specific, it's a tech product company. You will be building products. You will be building tech products.
Sure.
Now, who is going to build those tech products? You need product people to basically build those. So, software developers can't really write code unless they are told what to build, right? That is where a product person comes in. He basically takes the requirements, understands the user, and then comes up with what needs to be built and how it will be built to some extent. And then developers go ahead and build it. And because of that, the number of product roles is constantly increasing. And you can also see the reason the huge increase in product roles is because a lot of the startup ecosystem in India is now a lot more mature as compared to 5 years back. A lot more tech startups have started up. A lot more funding is happening. So a lot more product roles.
What do you mean by the startup ecosystem in India is mature? What has changed exactly?
So when I say mature, it's relative, right? I'm not comparing the maturity of the startup ecosystem with the startup ecosystem in the Silicon Valley or China, right? They're very different, right? They're much mature, they are decades ahead. But India's startup ecosystem is definitely has come a long way as compared to, let's say, 10 years back when I started out, right? So what I mean by that is there are a lot more funds which can give you money when you're starting up, right? There are a lot of experienced entrepreneurs in the ecosystem now that can help you, or they can fund you as angels as well, right? Number of angels in the industry has really, right?
Yeah.
And there is a lot of now expertise. People know what things will work, what will not work. There are some frameworks in place. So a lot of things have been discovered. It's think of it the first time Mount Everest was summited, right? So a lot of hard work was done by the Bansals of Flipkart, people like that, right? Who basically went and took that uncharted territory, right? And made it easier for the next stage of entrepreneurs, right? So that has changed.
Interesting. This sort of reminds me of the Indus Valley report, which was published by Bloom a couple of months ago, this year. The way they classified the markets in India is they just, have you read it before, the Indus Valley report?
No.
So they classified it as India 1 Alpha, India 1, and then India 2. So India 2 is basically the very lower middle class, the people who don't really actively spend on the internet. The next is the India 1. It's a huge chunk of people who kind of still spend on the internet. And then there is India 1 Alpha, people who spend exorbitantly heavy amounts of money on the internet. And the way the way the consumers behave differently is very interesting, right? So if you think about Netflix, like you cannot imagine in India a two-person actually purchasing Netflix. Like Netflix is specifically built for India one, like it was obviously, right? Whereas this is not how it works in other countries. Like there's like two parts of one. There's a poor part, and the other one is like the people who actually spend money. It's very interesting about it. I think this is why building for India is very difficult, right? Because if this is just my hypothesis in general, right? You please correct me if I'm wrong. So at least when in India, when a product has to scale, they have to realize the fact that people will not actively spend on it in itself. If they want to reach like great amounts. Let's say if let's a company like ShareChat, right? A company like ShareChat, they wouldn't have a lot of people transacting heavy amounts of money on the internet. So their average customer value will be very low. So that's that. I think it's very difficult to scale in India. What do you think about this? Like what are the challenges that come with building for India in the online space?
Yeah, so you've already pointed out, I agree with a large chunk of what you've said. See, essentially in India, if you're getting someone's wallet share is much more difficult as opposed to getting someone's attention and time. So in India, if you're building a product, you need to realize that people have a lot of time on their hands. If you were building a product that is dependent on engagement, and you want to engage your users and you want them to spend more time on your product, on your app, if you're building something in the B2C space, the market is huge. The market is really big. You can include like India 2 and India 1 and your India 1 alpha as well. Because I would say India 1 alpha less because they have less time. I would say India 2, as you go down, people have more and more time, right? And the opposite works with the money goes the other way, right? So getting money out of an Indian customer's pocket is much more difficult as compared to the US counterpart, US consumer, right? But that is changing gradually, but the change is still slow, right? It's going to take time. There are a lot of structural issues in India, and it's going to take time for that to penetrate, that penetration to happen. So so to answer your question, right? If first of all, you need to first differentiate between building a B2C startup and a B2B startup, right? If you're building something in the B2C space in India, right? You need to first figure out what you're building, will it work with volume or markets, right? If you're building something that is more margin dependent and less volume dependent, then you have to target your India 1 alpha or maybe India 1, right? If you're building B2C space, that is margins are low, but you're dependent on scale, right? A lot more, as many people, it's better. Then you can go up to India 2 as well, right? So you have to keep that in mind. With B2B, it's slightly different. If you're building a product in the B2B space, you need to realize you'll be selling to enterprises or SMBs. And again, if you're selling to enterprises and SMBs, you're still selling to people working in those enterprises and SMBs, right?
Yeah.
And over there also, you need to keep in mind that in India, efficiency takes a backseat, and the ability to put people at a problem is easier.
It's preferred,
right?
Yeah.
It's preferred, right? Because we have a lot of people, right, who can work for a lot less money as compared to US, right? So if I'm selling a B2B product, and let's say I go to my B2B customer working in a company, I tell them, use my product. This product will make you, let's say, 25% more efficient, right? It will save your time. Like you let's say you're working for 4 hours, you'll be if you use my product, you'll work say 3 hours or 2 hours, whatever, right? The person will not take a lot of interest. His or her outlook would be, tell me, can you save my money?
Exactly.
If you can save my money, tell me how much money you can save. That would take more importance, right? And the other feedback that we'll get if you're selling to B2B users is, why should I use your product and spend let's say 2 lakhs per year when I can hire 2 people and pay them 1 lakh in a year,
Yeah.
right? And they can do the same thing, right?
Back office are like very common. Yeah.
Right? But if you take US, it works very differently there. Right?
Exactly.
It's very different, right? If you sell there, people like, okay, if your product makes me more efficient, great, I'm ready to spend, right? So that's how. So
Very
these are the challenges,
Yeah. So this is the last question I want to ask you about product is, what do you think is the greatest product that has ever been built, at least in a digital space, and why? From your end.
Give me a minute.
Sure. It can be digital. It can be, it can be a hybrid as well.
I think a bunch come to mind, but if I had to pick one, for me at least, I think it would be WhatsApp.
Very interesting. Why is that?
Yeah. See, two things. Because of its simplicity and reach, right? You go to the remotest village in India, right? And you go to the most illiterate person in the country and the remotest place, right? That person might not know how to search on Google. That person might not even have a smartphone, but that person might most likely will be on WhatsApp.
Got it.
That is how ubiquitous it has become, right? And the amazing thing is it's how easy to use it is, and when it was started, how intuitive it was, but still no one built it before then, right? So the ability to basically hook your address book, right, into WhatsApp so that all your contacts are visible and you can message them, and this happened cross-platform through the internet. Basically, it killed SMS, right? I remember before WhatsApp, people used SMS. Right? So for me, I think because of the simplicity and the reach of the product, WhatsApp has to be.
Yeah, I think the way the way I look at things is if a product has managed to figure out a template that is alive even after years of their launch, and if it still exists in similar products, that means the product is very successful. So if you think about WhatsApp's chat design, right? Now it has set a standard for every other chat platform. Like every other platform that has chat, it has something or certain components that are sort of similar to WhatsApp. WhatsApp had this. They introduced the way you swipe a message and then you can reply to it individually. That's what sort of changed the chat game. Because earlier people used to copy the same message, that used to paste it there, press enter a couple of times so that the person is not confused, and then reply that. I think that's that. What do you think about Apple, like the way Apple approaches product? And specifically, let's say the Vision Pro, because that's like the latest launch, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. Before I get to that, I'll just answer the first part of the question. Right? I think I see Apple now, it's a tech company, right? It's a cutting edge tech company, of course, but it's also a luxury goods company. I at least it tries to play in that domain, right? The brand has now become a symbol. The brand basically says ki, let's say if I have an Apple Watch or Apple Pods or say a Mac, it's basically a signal to the world that I am better than you, right?
Yeah.
Come mate with me, right? So that is what it has become, and that's what luxury goods basically are. Most luxury brands are trying to cater to, right?
Yeah.
So I think Apple tries to has positioned their brand like that to some extent. Their products are definitely they're very easy to use and they are kind of beautiful. But again, I don't think they are innovating as much as some other tech product companies are. So I think in that regard, maybe they are lagging behind. I could be wrong, but that's my perspective.
What do you mean by waiting exactly?
Sorry?
You said they are not waiting as much as the other tech companies. So like, I didn't quite catch.
They're not innovating.
Innovating. Interesting. Yeah. Well, why is that though? I mean, Apple always sort of has this demeanor that they are like the beacon of innovation. Why do you think so?
See, they've never really invented something like from scratch, right? They have taken inventions, they've taken inventions that existed that no one understood the value of, and they've basically taken it to the masses very beautifully, right?
Yeah.
Right? They have done that very elegantly, right? But they've done that, right? So a lot of credit goes to them for taking inventions and technologies that were nascent and that were not for the masses, and they basically brought those technologies mainstream. So a lot of credit goes to them for being able to do that for a large period of time. But I think they're now lagging behind as compared to companies like Microsoft or let's say OpenAI, which is again largely funded by Microsoft. So I think in the AI race, they are lagging behind. And they have this closed ecosystem in which they operate in, right? They might be working on something, right, which is better than, let's say, OpenAI or maybe they are building on a lot of things that they don't talk about. But I think the Microsoft's approach currently is much, much better as opposed to
Interesting.
Apple's.
Very interesting. Because recently I did like a bunch of research on the Apple Vision Pro, because I had like a presentation to give just a week ago, and I find the way so as you said, right, they take already existing technology and sort of implement them into their products and make them look elegant. Have you looked at the Vision Pro before?
No, I haven't. I've heard of how it works, and I've not really experienced it. I've never used it. Yeah.
The fun part about the Vision Pro is that it's built to fail, because no one in their right mind would actually spend $3,500 on like a headset, right? Whereas they can do a bunch of other things with it and buy a bunch of different tech products. But the way they have built it has sort of set stage for the later developments of AR and VR. They have sort of figured out, I think they've introduced a couple of different technologies for developers to sort of build infrastructure into like their Vision Pro. At least, as you said, right, they introduced LiDAR there, they introduced Siri there. And the way they have sort of backtracked to the things they've already made and put it into a product which is completely novel to the users, it's very interesting. And and the question from that is like, do you think the AR, VR, or like the superset of the two is something that we can be looking at in the coming future? And where do you see the world like with respect to like AR and VR?
I think what Apple is trying to do with AR, right? That form factor, I think somewhere down the line will become mainstream, but I don't see that happening anytime soon, right? So I'll elaborate on that, right? There is a reason we use the smartwatch or the smartphone, right? Especially the Apple, the iPhone and the Apple Watch, is because it not only makes us efficient, right? It also is good to look at, right? It's aesthetic. It's not. It makes you cooler, right? It doesn't take. So if let's say you are X amount cool, right? And let's say if you're wearing the AirPods, or if you have the Apple Watch, at least how the world looks at you is you become certain degrees cooler, right? At least from the average man. Yeah, at least from the average man's perspective. The problem with AR VR headsets right now is, right, having that on your face, in your face, it doesn't make you cooler. It takes coolness away from you, right?
Exactly.
That's the problem. That's the problem with the current form factor, right?
Yeah.
Unless this technology, the hardware, specifically talking about hardware here, right? This hardware morphs into a form factor which becomes cool to put on your body, it will never go mainstream. Once it becomes cool to put on your body and it becomes a status symbol kind of thing, then it will go mainstream.
Yeah.
So I think how the hardware and the software converges with AR, VR technologies would. I think AR has a lot more potential than VR. VR is like very specific to certain use cases.
Yeah.
I think VR is very specific to certain use cases. That's how I see it.
Very interesting. Right? So if you think about it, the form factor thing, I think the timing was wrong, right? So when Google Glasses launched, I think it was 2013 or something. I'm not sure. I think it was back then. They had a similar form factor of the glasses, and the way it worked was it had like a tiny screen that you could look through. Did you try those by any chance, like by a slim chance? No. So the thing is, that failed horribly. And if you compare the form factor back then and the form factor right now, that form factor was cooler. Like, obviously, you would rather wear these than like a ski goggles. But funnily, people just rejected the idea of other people wearing a smart glass back in the day because it had a very visible camera. I think that's one of the reasons why. Funnily, people were called glass holes for wearing those back in the day, and people just stopped buying those and they stopped production as that.
I think that is totally understandable.
Yeah, if I walk around with my phone like this, like, and just even if I'm not recording, it's just weird, right? So it's very intrusive as the product, and I think currently, like recently, Meta launched their glasses as well. Like, did you see the launch video?
Yeah, I've seen the video again. Yeah.
What do you think about
the
that?
form factor? I think the form factor is much better. It's very similar to the Google glasses that was launched, right? If I'm correct.
Mm-hmm. The fun part that these guys have tried is it's I mean, it can be double-edged sword as well, right? So what they did was
they're working with Ray-Ban.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So the way they're doing it is it's linked with your Instagram or your Facebook Live account, and you can record at only like a minute-long video, and it's in a portrait mode. So you can directly share it via your glasses to your whatever your account is, but the funny part is you can live stream via the glasses for as long as you want, which is a very weird step I think they've taken. Also, they're coming back to Meta, right? So
I think the reason they've taken just to before you come to that, the reason that step is because at the end of the day, Zuckerberg and Meta are looking at different forms of increasing engagement on their platform, right? So it's basically it's like they're building something in augmented reality, but at the end of the day, it helps you post on Instagram like more seamlessly and more efficiently, and increases your engagement. You can always be on the platform. And the problem with companies like Meta building products like that is there is an inherent distrust that people have with companies like Meta, right? Because they already own so much of their data, right? They don't want them to come up with a product, a hardware product that can take in a lot more data, and it just doesn't make people comfortable.
For sure. And I think the sad part about VR and AR is it's competing with literally everything, right? So if I'm wearing a headset, I mean, it's much more harder for me in comparison to if I'm just scrolling my phone on Instagram. It's competing with Instagram. It's competing with me watching like TV. It's competing with things which take very low effort, very minimal effort. Whereas using AR or VR, you have to first wear it, connect it, charge it, and find friends in order to take experience whatever you want in VR. I think that's why removing the friction between the two worlds, like from the real world and the AR/VR world, I think that's why they have probably done it. Also, like, coming back to Meta, what do you think went wrong with Zuck's idea of the Metaverse? This is back in 2021, and we all know what happened.
Yeah. So I think what went wrong, I think the bottom line is people were not really comfortable with the idea of totally living in a digital world, right? Because we partly live in a digital world. We live in a physical world. We have our digital footprints. We are already, right? We're kind of cyborgs already. Right? But having this metaverse, right, in which you totally have an identity of yours, right, and you're sucked into that alternate reality, right? It seems so much like a Black Mirror episode, right?
Yeah.
So it can be slightly scary. I think that's one of the reasons. I think we're not there yet for Metaverse. I see. Also, I think it was too blown out of proportions. I think Metaverse is somewhat like 3D printing. I don't know if it will ever take off.
3D printing, like, why would you say that? But you can experience like a lot of things in Metaverse. I mean, it's not just about the way things are printed. What do you mean by that?
I know that you can experience, right? You can actually like experience a lot of things that you don't. There are a lot of use cases of Metaverse. I know that. I understand that part. But again, I'm apprehensive. I wouldn't say apprehensive. I'm scared, right? Maybe this millennial in me talking. I'm slightly scared with things like Metaverse going mainstream.
Very interesting. What's with like VCs and Black Mirror? Like, every VC I've talked to has watched Black Mirror. Like, there's something. I think it's something to do with like the futuristic idea of the world, and that's what they're sort of gauging. And nextly, let's get to VC for a bit, and we forgot to discuss about the entrepreneurship section, but yeah, we will get there eventually. Now we are at VCs. So how does the VC world work? Like what's the how at least the VC ecosystem in India, how is that structured? How is it different from the VC system in abroad? From what I know, the VC ecosystem in India is very young, and they are yet to see their very first successes yet. I mean, by success I mean like huge successes. So what's different?
So it's very different. So if you compare US, right, the VC ecosystem in US is like started in 1960s. It's like way old, right? And India VC started coming in like mid 2000s, 2005 around, right? And bunch of foreign VCs opened their offices in India, and then companies like Flipkart happened. And then from then, we have some VCs in the ecosystem. But if you compare the depth, it's nowhere close. And what I mean by depth, right? So neither the Indian market is as deep as the US market that warrants the need of so many VCs, right? The US market is much bigger than the Indian market, right? So again, that is because of the propensity to pay. Like the propensity of an average Indian American, how much that person can in India is like very different, right? They're more of a consumerist society as opposed to ours, right?
Sure.
We still have DNA of saving money and not have saving at least some money and spending some. And they are they've always been at the cutting edge of innovation. They still are, and I think foreseeable for some time at least, for the foreseeable future at least, right? So the risk capital that US has is much higher as opposed to India, right? In India, we are still figuring out a lot of things at the infrastructure level and at the distribution level, right?
Yes.
US has already cracked. They have great infra, right? They don't have distribution problems. They are more, into what technologies that we need to develop in the future to take us to take humanity to the next level, right? So the depth is much higher in the US market. They also have a lot of the funds in US have larger fund cycle, so they give their entrepreneurs more comfort and more time on building their companies, right? They can play the market share game much longer as opposed to Indian VCs, right? Where they have to return money in a certain amount of time. So I think these are some of the differences. Also, I think one big difference is because the startup ecosystem in India is not that old, right? The first generation of startup entrepreneurs have just made money, right?
Yes.
And have just started reinvesting that money into the ecosystem, right? So like the Bansals of Flipkart, right, Myntra, and then all of these companies that went public and made all these founders who have made money, they have started putting that money back into the ecosystem through their angel investments or through setting up a fund.
Very interesting,
right?
Yes.
Right, and that basically matures the investing ecosystem or the VC ecosystem in a country. In US, this has been happening for decades.
Since ages, right? Yes.
Since ages. That's the reason they have a very mature ecosystem.
That's very interesting. So it's sort of like the same money coming back in the ecosystem, which makes that's insane. I think that also helps with like better decision making because people who have actually built stuff before they'll probably make or hedge better bets than someone who hasn't, which is pretty cool. So yes,
it's
how
not necessarily.
Not really?
So that the last not so it's so I've been talking to some people in the company, some of my VC friends. I was under the same assumption, right? That operators and founders would make best VCs, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily true, right? It could be, it could not be, but if there are a lot of VCs who've never started up but have a great track record opposed to some VCs who have been founders before.
Sure.
You can take
example. Yeah.
You can take examples of Bill Gurley, the guy who funded Uber and other companies, right? So there are, and if you look at funds like Sequoia and Axel, there are a lot of people there who have great investing records who have never been founders. So
Very
there is
interesting.
this bias that we have.
Maybe it's just the skill of sort of reviewing a founder and looking at like the team is something more important than the operational experience. That's what maybe sort of drives better investments.
Bunch of factors.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
So
So let's sort of get into how you broke into the VC world, because right now everybody wants to sort of break into the VC world. At least that's because Sajid Pai recently wrote an article on it on LinkedIn, I guess. So yeah, how did you get your break in VC?
So I didn't actually try to break into VC. It happened. So they reached out. Right, Venture Highway reached out to me through a headhunter, and I interviewed and I joined. Right. So for me, I didn't have to put in a lot of effort. But I can tell you how to break into VC. Right. So there are generally two kinds of people who are hired at VC funds. Right. The first category is basically people who have really high pedigree, right? People who come from top colleges and people who have worked at top companies, right? People who have worked, studied from IIMs and went into McKinsey, BCG, top consulting or investment banking background, right? So high pedigree is a way to get into investing, VC investing. That's one route. The second route is being a founder yourself, right? If you have the experience of being a founder, maybe you've started a company or two, and you have some sort of, you've portrayed some sort of, evidence of success in entrepreneurship. Maybe you've sold your company, you've exited. That helps, right? So past entrepreneurial experience also gives you a way to get into VC. The third way, I said two, but I think there is another way which happens, but it's not as prevalent, is you have a lot of domain experience in something, and that is valuable to VCs. Let's say you have 15 to 20 years of experience in product, or for let's say technology, or let's say finance, right? So VCs are looking to hire these kind of people in specific roles. I think these are the three ways to get into VC.
Very interesting. How is the VC your VC job different to like working at your own startup and then working at other startups like Paytm? Like how different is this? And which one would you prefer if you are given a chance?
So first preference will always be being a founder when I'm running my own startup, right? Because as a founder, the amount of things you are doing and how exciting and how depressing your day could be, right? Is amazing. Like it's like a sinusoidal curve, right? And you don't know what's going to happen. So that experience is totally different. Being a founder cannot be compared to any job, whether it's a VC job or being working in a tech product company. Right? So that's definitely something separate from the other two. Just to differentiate between working with a VC fund and working at a tech product company like Paytm is, in a tech product company like Paytm, you are working at a very, very big scale, right? Scale is the exciting factor there, right? Anything that you're building, right, or any mistake that you're making will impact millions of users.
Yes.
Right. So that is exciting, and there is a lot of stakeholder management in a company like Paytm when you're building a product, right? So that can be slightly icky sometimes, but it also teaches you a lot, right? How to work with people.
Yes.
Right. What makes the VC job very different from working in the tech product company is, like, VCs have a very high bar on the people that they hire, right? So all the people that I work with in the fund are super smart, and the conversations that you have with them are really intellectually stimulating. That is amazing. That for me at least is like amazing. And even when you're talking to founders, you get to talk to some really good founders and see what is happening in the industry, how different markets are, currently. You have a ringside view on different markets and what is working in different markets and where the trends are.
Very interesting. So do you think like VCs have early access to like trends, right? So because I think they have like they kind of they have the way to change the way the future is, right? So if a VC firm decides to push in a lot of money in a specific sectors, it's definite that it'll at least boom.
Correct. This is only specific to certain VC funds, not every. Like so let's say a fund like a A16Z or a fund like a Sequoia, right? They definitely they make markets. Sometimes they're called as market makers. If they decide to put in a lot of money in a market, they can make it. So the Web3 market, you can give a lot of credit to A16Z for putting a lot of money into that market and creating it to a large extent. Yeah, so it depends on the fund, right? Smaller funds, not so much.
Yeah, it's almost like they created their own artificial market for for their own experiments to be ran and to see how what works and what doesn't work in an ecosystem which is as different as Web3. Web3 is very fascinating. I mean, I've talked to a couple of folks about Web3 and people have very polarizing views, like absolutely. Because I talked to folks from Zerodha and Dinesh Bhai, the head of Rain Matter, and he has a very nuanced take on Web3, which is a very subtle fuck you to the Web3 ecosystem, which is very interesting. Whereas I talked to a bunch of Web3 folks, which is, Vatsal Kanake is a Web3, it was a Web3 VC at 2MVC. Dipanshu Parashar, who used to build at Web3. They're very varying perspectives. Why do you think that is? Why is there such a bipolarity in the way people approach Web3? Do you think it's because of the artificial markets being made and them being sort of the part of the experiments?
I think a large chunk of it would be because of the vested interests people have. So they have their own perspectives, right? I think a lot of people would be slightly apprehensive if let's say Bitcoin and Web3 goes mainstream. A lot of the capital would actually go from the existing markets would flow into the Web3, right? Which could not be so good for them. Like for example, right? Let's say if people start investing in Bitcoin and let's say other Web3 cryptos a lot more, the amount of money going into stock market, right, would decrease. Right?
Yeah, sure.
That could be like those vested interests could come. Yeah.
Very interesting. So on a side note, right? I think this podcast will go on for longer, like because I think our slot was like 6:30 say 8 and it's like 7:45 already. Okay, awesome. So what we can do is we can break for like 5 to 10 minutes. And you can freshen up. I think my eyes are sort of giving up on me. I have to put in some drops. I'll be back in like 5:10. You can sort of grab a drink or whatever, and we'll begin in like 5 to 10. Awesome. Okay, so we are back. So the thing I want to jump in right now is entrepreneurship, as Nipun himself is a 2x entrepreneur. So yes, Nipun, let's talk about your first startup that you started. It was Mentoza. So talk me through that. What led you to start the business?
So I think I've already answered what led me to start my first startup, right? Because the first job was with an early stage startup, and I was very closely working with the founders. So after working there for 1 year, I decided to start something of my own, right?
But why that specific problem statement, like as to like a marketplace for expertise? Like why that?
Yeah. So the startup that I was working with was in the edtech space. So I was looking at that space, right? I was looking at things that I could do in that space, right? So that's the reason I was exploring that market. As I was doing my market research, primary and secondary market research, I understood a couple of things about that market, right? I first wanted to create something. I wanted to create an edtech product for the K-12 segment, right? That was my first idea that I came up with. But after doing my analysis, I understood that it will be a very difficult market to crack, especially in 2012, 2013, because of multiple reasons. Reason number one, the sales cycle would be long, because for the K-12 segment, the decision maker is the parent, but the end user is the student.
Yes.
It's not straightforward. Secondly, the bandwidths in our country didn't really allow for video streaming and video lectures and all that. So these were the two main reasons. I decided not to do anything in the K-12 segment. Then I zeroed in on the idea of building a marketplace for professional expertise, right? So the idea was to create a marketplace for one-to-one professional advice, right? So and we wanted to start with the startup industry. The idea was that a first-time entrepreneur needs help with a bunch of things, right? The first-time entrepreneur needs help with idea validation, fundraising, how to get the product market fit, sales, right? If that first-time entrepreneur can talk to seasoned or successful entrepreneurs or domain experts in those particular functions, that could be a huge value add for that first-time entrepreneur. That was the thesis, right? So with this thesis, I got on to build a marketplace where advisors or / mentors would be listed with their detailed profiles and the work that they've done, their work experience, and what they've done. And anyone seeking advice could come onto the platform, find the mentor / advisor of their choice, and book a 1 hour or 2 hour one-to-one session with them. That was the idea, right? So we started with this. I built a team around me, and we had a few hundred mentors listed on the platform. Then we had some, I think, more than 500 interactions that happened through the platform. And as we were trying to scale this, we realized two problems, right? Number one, there was not enough incentive for the mentor to be listed on the platform.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So here I am. I go to let's say a product expert to be listed on the platform. I tell them, be on our platform, and let's say you'll be paid 3,000 rupees for a 1 hour call. Example, right? For someone who is in the industry for 15 years and who makes like a good amount of money, that is not really an incentive.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right. The only incentive that these mentors had to be listed on the platform was they wanted to give back to their alumni or to their juniors, right? That was the only incentive. But it is not scalable. We're trying to build a tech product. It's not scalable. So that was the first problem that we encountered. And the second and the bigger problem that we encountered was people were not willing to pay, right? Monetizing advice was very difficult, right? And I'm talking about 2012, 2013 here, right? In 2013, people were not used to paying for software. There was no Netflix. People were not paying for subscriptions. People were not used to paying for software. And I was in the market asking them to pay for advice, which is something that can be really valuable. The right advice could be really valuable, but because the nature of advice is intangible, it was difficult to monetize it, right?
Interesting.
The payment that I got from the market was, if I'm looking for advice, I would somehow find the relevant person in my network or LinkedIn and try to get that advice. Why should I pay for it, right? So ran that for 1 year, 3 months, around 1 year, 3 months, and decided to shut it down because of these two reasons. So that is what happened. And I think that was one of the most steep learning curves of my life, right? I learned a lot, right? I made, I think, a lot of mistakes, and that really helped.
Very interesting, because funnily, I built something similar, like not really, but like a little bit similar, like recently at BuildSpace. You know what BuildSpace is?
No.
Okay, so BuildSpace is a company funded by YC. So it's like a company which lets builders build, basically. So they give you like a 6-week task. Okay, if you're building, you have to submit the idea, and once you're selected, you have to build it and regularly submit updates. Like, they don't take stake or anything. It's just like they're just helping the founders build. So they have like weekly lectures and whatnot, and it's almost like a program. So we built like a platform for agencies, digital agencies, people who write code for others, run ads for others, and whatnot. And we adopted initially we wanted to adopt a model in which we take a cut from the service, like the service charge. But then it was very difficult to navigate financially, at least from the CAs that I sort of consulted. These guys are like, "Tu bill kiske upar banayega?" That's what their general the question to me was, and I'm not that equipped with common skills, so I didn't really have an answer. So we, for at least the MVP, we figured out a way to build it like a social media thingy for agencies. So agencies which pay to be listed higher, were listed higher. Otherwise, it was just like the way according to relevance. That's what we built. And we sort of encountered the same problem, like legacy agencies which had a bunch of. So the thing with at least the agency market, I've realized, is they have recurring customers. Like if an agency has a customer, they'll make sure that customer is with them for a long amount of time, and there's not a lot of new discoveries for legacy agencies. That's what we figured, and that's exactly why we couldn't do that well there. And we figured the product was kind of, I don't want to say redundant, but it wasn't really worthwhile, at least for the agencies. And even we shut it down quicker. We shut down at least I think 4.5 months. Yeah. That's that. We found a way to break even, but yeah, it was also it was a very steep learning curve. And for me, like I built it with my friends, right? So it was easy for me to get folks. How did you get your team to build it?
I started with one of my batchmates. So
Batchmates.
Yeah, college.
How many people were you in the team?
3, and we had a few interns.
Interesting. Yeah. So my question was, do you think it's a good idea to get interns when you're like sort of starting out? Because because you said like in the early stages of the company you got an interns, like how was it? Like you had to train them from scratch, I believe.
That only works, Yash, if you have a tech co-founder, right? If you're hiring tech interns, right? In our case, we only hired interns for writing code. So if you have a tech co-founder who is leading it, then you can still manage with certain interns. But if you were to ask me, I would choose a full-time employee over an intern. But right, that was
very interesting.
Yeah, any day of the week, a full-time employee is preferable as opposed to an intern.
Very interesting. So, what were the mistakes that you made in your first business as was Mentoza, and that you would never want to repeat again?
A lot of mistakes. I don't know. I think the podcast would be like really long if I start listing down all of them. But I'm gonna talk about a couple, maybe top ones.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Just give me a minute.
For sure. I'll pour my coffee. I just brewed it like a couple of minutes ago.
I think one of the best things I learned, that in the first startup, I'm talking about my first startup now only, is that I gave a lot of importance to the product that we were building, right? Product is just a small part of making your startup successful, right? I should have given a lot more thought to the ICP, the GTM, right? And the market in general, right? These things are very, very important. I would say building the product is easy. Mapping your product to the right market is the difficult part, and that is what we call the product market fit, right? So if I had put in a lot more time on figuring out the right ICP and figuring out the right GTM strategy, things might have been different. But having said that, I still think the 2 reasons that I told you because of which I shut down were the primary reasons. We underestimated the propensity to pay of Indian users, right? We didn't really, again, realize that people don't pay for advice, especially in that. And we needed to be very clear who would pay for something like that. That ICP was not so well defined.
Very interesting. Were there any mistakes that you made in hiring? And how do you, let's say if you're building a startup, if you're hiring somebody, what are certain things that you need to keep in mind before hiring them in very early stages?
Okay. So you're talking about hiring a co-founder, or you're talking about hiring the first initial set of employees?
I think the first initial set of employees, because I think everybody kind of has like the co-founders sorted because they know someone in their life, okay, maybe I might build with them. Regardless if it's a good or right or bad decision, but at least the first employees, what is something that founders should look at?
I think you're looking for, when you're hiring your first set of employees, you're looking for more of generalists. Specialists, right? You're looking for you're looking for people who could handle different functions in your company, right? So, and you're not looking for too senior folks because they generally operate at scale. So you're looking for a sweet spot. You're looking for someone who has some specialization in a function, plus some sort of experience in that, some sort of range of experience, right? But not too much, right? And someone who is hands-on, right? So you're looking at these three things, right? So I'll give you an example to be clear. So so let's say you're trying to hire for someone who could handle enterprise sales in the company. Let's say you're building a
Sure.
product, right? So ideally, you would be looking for someone who has done some enterprise sales, right? Some experience with enterprise sales. But you will be looking for that. But you will be looking for enterprise sales experience in small companies, in startups, in companies that are either seed funded or Series A funded, not beyond that. Someone who has enterprise sales experience with a company like Salesforce will not be relevant for your super early stage startup, right? Because selling in those two, in a startup and an established company is very different, right? And you will also be looking at someone who does not have more than, I would say, 10 years of experience in the initial stages at least, because you need someone who is hands-on, someone who can do, someone who has been like the head of sales in a company like Salesforce for a long time, not hands-on at all, right? He does not know what it actually takes to actually go and sell to the client.
Makes sense.
Right? So you're looking for those intersections that I talked about.
So you want, so is it something to do with like the way people improvise if they are sort of new and figure out their own way to do things, which makes them a little bit more flexible? Because if also, correct me if I'm wrong, the reason why you're saying more than 10 years of experience, because if someone has more than 10, let's say 15 years of experience, they have certain biases and their own preconceived notions, which probably might hinder your like new way of solving things.
Absolutely, because you're figuring out in the initial stages of the startup, you don't know a lot of things. I think a lot of it is unknown. You're figuring out a lot of things. You're trying experiments. You're doing a lot of hidden trial. You don't know what will work and what will not work, right? So you need to have that kind of attitude.
Very
you need
interesting.
people who have that kind of mindset.
Yes, and as you said about like a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned about studying the market well and figuring out if you have product market fit. How does one study the market before building their product? What's the three things that a founder should look at before starting out, at least with context of the market?
Okay. Number one, I think ICP needs to be properly defined. ICP is the ideal customer profile. Right? Who is your customer? Who is the end customer? Who are you targeting? You need to understand everything about that customer, right? And then the second thing would be, you need to understand how your ICP currently solves the problem you are trying to solve, right? Are they using some other products? Then you look, if they are using some other products to solve the problem that you want to solve, you would want to look at the incumbents, the other players in the market, right?
Sure.
So you need to look at ICP, then you need to look at the competitors in the space, right? And when I say competitors in the space, that would help you understand what are the existing solutions in the market, right? So you can know where are the gaps and what already works, right? And you also need to understand if there are, let's say you're in a blue ocean where competitors do not exist or are very less. Then you need to then figure out how your ICP currently solves the problem that you're trying to solve. There must be some way, right?
Yes.
So ICP, competitive space, competitors in the market, and you would need to define your market size as well, especially if you're trying to build a VC business, right? You need to figure out your TAM, right? You need to figure out, depending on the nature of the business, maybe the average revenue per user that you will get, or the average order value. You need to figure out these things. You need to figure out your TAM and SAM also. So I think these 2-3 things would really help you.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's get to the second startup that you built, which is Recruiter Grid, which is exactly a year later you shut down your initial business. And for the timing, I guess I believe you worked at I believe Policy. Yes, exactly. So what was that period like? Was you failed a startup, and I mean, failure is not that pleasant. So how did you deal with that? And is it difficult to maintain like relationships with people who built the initial startup with you, but it failed? Like how do you manage? How do you make sure there's no bad blood?
Between who? Sorry, come again.
So let's say you're co-founder, right? So you failed a startup together, right? So how do you make sure the relationship is still good? I mean, how do you make sure there's no bad blood?
You can control some of it. You can't control a large part of it as well, right? It depends. Yes, there is no right or wrong answer. There are, a lot of things actually could go wrong with a startup because the founders don't agree on things and they don't align, right? And especially when things go wrong in a startup, it really comes to the forefront. If things are going well, right? But when they go bad, it can really go bad. But I think at the end of the day, you have to be reasonable. You have to understand. It's sometimes can be because of your team that you fail. Sometimes can be because of your co-founder that you fail. But at the end of the day, if you're leading from the front, if you're co-founder number one, you have to take the responsibility of things not working out. You can't blame anyone else.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So since I take full responsibility.
Very interesting. How were the first few months like after shutting down the business?
It's very difficult. I remember crying in front of my parents. Right? So it's heartbreaking, especially for the first time because you don't know a lot of things that you're doing, right? So it was really heartbreaking. But I was not done. I was like, no, I understand a lot of things, went wrong, but I want to try again. That itch was there in me. The itch didn't go. But because I had run out of money and also I think I understood that this is not going to work out, I took up a job, right, with Policy Bazaar. I think which was again one of the most learning experiences of my life. That job at Policy Bazaar, that was the first, big, it was not really a startup. It was a fairly large, right, that I joined. So I got to work on things at scale. I got to do a lot of stakeholder management. I understood how corporations work, how B2B products are built. So it was a very learning experience for me.
Very interesting. So when did you figure out it's like the right time to shut the business down? Because I mean, as founders, everybody has this drive to figure out a way to make it work. So when do you know, okay, this is the right time to close this down?
Yes, you cut off.
Cut off?
Can you repeat the question? Yeah, you have to repeat the question.
My question is when did you realize okay, this is the right time to stop working on this problem? Like, and how do you figure that out? Like, as a founder, you have a lot of drive. So when do you need to know you have to stop?
With the first startup?
Yeah, first startup, yes.
It's a difficult question to answer, right? You have to be realistic as well as you see. So the catch here is you can sometimes people quit when they're really close to getting the product market fit, right? Sometimes people just keep going on without seeing anything. They waste a lot of time and they must have shut down way before, right? So I think you have to be really, really truthful to yourself, right? You need to basically define your product market fit. People don't define product market fit, right? And if you have a clear definition of your product market fit, right, you have to be realistic in what time you want to achieve that. And if you don't, then you have to basically either pivot or shut down, but you can't keep doing the same thing.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Let's get back to the second startup that you started, which is Recruiter Grid. When did you figure out it's the right time to now start up again and take all the risk you did take like just a year ago?
Yeah. So the thought was there in my head that I want to start again, right? Start for the second time. But I didn't plan that I would do it just 1 year after working at Policy Bazaar. So what interestingly happened when I was working at Policy Bazaar, right? We were looking to hire certain engineers in our team, right? So I was very closely, working with the HR team, helping them, find candidates, right? And I remember using certain platforms to find candidates, right? We were using platforms like Hacker Earth, right, to find candidates.
Mm.
That is when I was very closely exposed to players in the recruitment space, and I started doing some secondary market research, and I understood the different problems in the recruitment space at that time. Right, I understood that there are three parts to recruitment. There is sourcing, there is screening, and then there is engagement, closing.
Mm-hmm.
I then started talking to some recruiters, especially tech product recruiters, and understood the problems that they were facing. And I understood that there is an opportunity to build something here, right? I also looked at the US market and what kind of companies are working. And I looked at India, what is working and what is not working. And after talking to enough people, I zeroed in on the idea of building recruiter grid, right? So once that dawned on me, I put in my papers and got hold of my tech co-founder who was also working with me at Policy Bazaar. And I convinced him to quit his job along with me. And both of us started Recruiter Grid. And this was 2015, right?
2015.
And yeah, and I think we started in the mid of 2015. But interestingly, I don't know if you know it or not, the second half of 2015 and then 2016 and to some early 2017 was the worst time to start up in India, right? It was...
Why exactly?
It was a down market. No one was investing. It was like totally dry, right? And I did not have that realization because I was, I don't know, I didn't know any better, right, at that point of time, right? So the idea was right, but the timing was not, right? So we struggled a lot in raising money in the initial 1 to 1.5 years, right? After that, I had the opportunity of raising money, angels, but I did not. And thankfully I did not, because if I had raised money from angels, for me making an exit would have been more difficult.
Makes sense. When was this? Like when you had the opportunity to raise from angels? How many years later you started?
I think 1 to 1.5 years.
Interesting. So so who were your competitors back then? Was JobSpare around back in the day or no?
Sorry?
JobSpire. JOBSPIR.
I think it was there. I think it was not a prominent player, so I don't think we looked at that. But it has always been a competitive space, recruitment, right? So in India, there were the usual ones like the Naukri of InfoEdge, right?
Yeah.
There was Monster, but again, Naukri had majority of the market share. There was LinkedIn. LinkedIn has always been there, right? Another player in the recruitment space. So Naukri and LinkedIn were the prominent players, and then there was Indeed, who had some sort of market share, and then there were a bunch of so there was IMJobs, right, and Hires.com, which was another product in India. IMJobs, they were catering to tech product jobs. So these were some of the prominent players in India, and then there were a bunch of startups who were trying to build something to disrupt the incumbent players like us, right? But the US space was like much more competitive as opposed to India, right? In the US, there were a lot of players who were trying to build different solutions to solve the problem. But we realized this later, that this market that we are in, it's fairly competitive, and you're just trying to get the wallet share of existing players, and it's very difficult. Very difficult to. Also understood that it's very difficult to sell SaaS products in India, especially where the market is not growing, right? So a lot of these realizations happen with time.
Interesting. So what are certain things that you learned about recruitment? Let's say someone wants to get a job. Like what are certain things that that gives the person like some form of an edge, at least back in the day, and that those are still relevant now?
See, again, I don't think I'm the right person to answer this question, because this can be better hired by a recruiter. I can talk about the industry and how the recruitment industry works. I think it is...
For sure.
I think right now also we see a lot of startups in the recruitment space. And I would be really apprehensive of investing in the recruitment space, because it's not a growing market. The number of jobs in the country, right, is not really growing, right? So your market is not growing, right? Secondly, when you go to a recruiter and try to sell your product in India, you are already you're already trying to replace the existing product solutions that they're using, which generally is Naukri or LinkedIn, right?
Makes sense.
And recruiters are already so comfortable with Naukri and LinkedIn that they don't want to use any other product. And if you go them and tell them that our product is going to make you more efficient, it's going to take you, save your time, they don't want to save time. They have a lot of people in their team who can spend a lot of time on an Excel sheet or the Naukri platform, even if it is not efficient, right? As opposed to spending some money and making themselves more efficient, right? So this continues to be this case. And let's say if you're trying to build a recruitment product in India, but you're trying to sell to the sell in the US market, or let's say the Southeast Asia market, then also it's very, very difficult because this space is really competitive. There are a lot of players, like there is Hiring Soft, Zentello. There are, I think 50 plus players in the US market who have some sort of significant traction. So it's a very competitive space to build in. That's what we realized. Luckily for us, when we were building Recruiter Grid, we had the front end of the product was specific to recruitment, but the back end was basically a data crawling, data aggregation layer. So we had built a technology, we had built a proprietary technology that was very useful. Right? And that is the reason we were acquisitive, what we had built. Right?
Interesting.
So, I think that's the key difference between building a B2C and a B2B product, right? Inherently, building a B2C product is much more risky, and the probability of success is lower as opposed to a B2B product, right? In B2B, you're playing the 0 or 1 game. Sorry, in B2C, you're playing the 0 and 1 game.
0 1, yes.
Yeah, either it will go bust or you'll create some significant large outcome. With B2B, the probability of making money is higher, right? If you are building something, if you're building a proprietary technology, right? Sorry, or if you have built something that you have enough users who are paying you for using your product, you become acquisitive. You can scale from there and become profitable as well. You can exist in a competitive space as well, right? So it's not a winner take all market.
Interesting. What do you think about companies which run like a separate service in tandem, and then with the help of that service they aid their recruitment? Like for example, the way Pesto does it, they train their professionals and then they set them up for certain interviews with foreign companies. So do you think those guys have some form of an edge because they'll make sure that the recruit is very, very credible and they have like the skills they need?
So I don't understand the model. You're talking about where this company is basically, they have their own interviewers. Is that it?
No. So the way Pesto works is they teach so you have to enroll in Pesto, and then once you are enrolled in, they teach you for like 3 to 4 months. It's like some form of a night school for like second time jobbers or third time jobbers. So they learn how to code throughout the process, and then they go to certain company interviews, like mainly like remote jobs based out in the US, and then they get, for the most part, it's almost like 100% placement thinking because they learn so well in the 3 months of training that they get placed directly. So do you think these guys kind of have an edge when they train their own recruits and give like higher quality of employees? But this model is kind of rare. Yeah.
Model, right? Yeah, I've seen now it's not so rare now, right? Maybe it was rare when we started up. Yeah, so this is a very different approach where you're basically you're creating your own man force and then you're trying to place them in companies, right? So I think this is very different to what we were trying to do. So you're basically creating supply here, right? And placing them, right? When we were building it, the problem was less with the supply and more with mapping the supply to the demand.
Sure. It was difficult to make the companies use your product. That's what the problem was.
So see the problem. So let's say if you went with our product to a company like Flipkart, right?
Yeah.
And say use our product, Flipkart would say we already have like 1 lakh resumes. We don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Right. So the problem that companies like Flipkart were facing was, can you give us a solution where you can tell us that these are the top 10 candidates that I need to talk to every day?
Interesting.
Correct. Out of the 1 lakh profiles that we have. Tell us which are the top 10 profiles we need to talk to specific to a particular job function. If you can do that, if you can solve for that, that is a value add, right? So
Very
it's about mapping the supply to the demand.
Very interesting. That's what this. So I read a LinkedIn, and there was the mention of AI. Like you implemented AI back in 2015 into this thing. So is this what you're talking about? Like mapping out the top 10 out of a lakh resumes and figuring out, okay, these are the best.
Right.
How does that work? Like at least from a brief algorithmic perspective, how does that work?
So
what do you guys look at?
Yeah, so we build, like, I'll explain it to you. So let's say you're looking for a job. You didn't have to come onto a platform and register yourself, right?
Yeah.
So what we did was, let's say we were catering to the tech jobs. We were specific to the tech jobs. So let's take the example of a software developer, right? We figured out that the data of a software developer is present on a bunch of platforms, right? You can find the data on LinkedIn, Stack Overflow, GitHub, Kaggle, Dribble for designers and data scientists. Then platforms like AngelList, right? So we figured out a bunch of platforms that we could crawl and index for relevant data of candidates, right? So then what we did was we started scraping data, legally available public data from all these different platforms of candidates, right?
Yes.
And once we had data of the candidates from different platforms, we aggregated different data points of a candidate to create a unified profile within our system, right?
Got it.
Let's say we are creating your profile. So we'll create Yash's profile by getting data of Yash from different platforms and putting it one place. Now this is easier said than done because there could be multiple Yashes on different
Makes
platforms.
sense.
Right?
Yeah.
So how would you make sure that you map
the right profiles?
The right profiles from different platforms, right? So we built certain algorithms to solve for that, right? So that was the first part of it, right? Building the sourcing engine so that data keeps coming in from different platforms into our database, right? Then the second engine was the data aggregation. Once we get the data, how do we filter the data, aggregate the data, and put everything in one place and map the right data, right? Once we have created the profile, once we gathered the data, aggregated it, the profile has been created now. Once the profile has been created, how we then map the profile to the right job description.
Got it.
That's the third part of it, right? That is what we built.
Very interesting. So, how difficult was building this back then? Because I believe there weren't a lot of APIs available, and building something as proprietary as this, I mean, even now is a little bit difficult, but like back then it would be exorbitantly much more difficult, right?
Yeah, so I'll tell you. So it was fairly difficult because data crawling, so there were different challenges. Data crawling was one challenge because platforms like LinkedIn kept changing their structures and then their how the data is presented. So we had to keep just changing our crawlers, right, regularly. Second problem was with data aggregation because there was a lot of junk data that was coming in. We had to filter that out. Once you filter that out, then you also have to map different data points of a candidate. How do you map that effectively? That's the second problem that we had to solve. The third problem, which has become really, really easy now because of GPT, right, and like textual search that is available. Building effective, because what we built, mapping the right profile to the right job description requires a lot of search capability, a lot of really, really intelligent contextual search capability.
Yeah.
Because you're essentially matching a resume, a profile, which has a bunch of data with a job description, which has another data, right? How do you do that without losing context? How do you basically map them, right? So we used a lot of keyword mapping and a lot of intelligence that was built into the product, which if let's say I was building it today, it would have become much easier. I would have just needed to use the GPT and it would have been
APIs, yeah. Makes sense. How see, the thing is, building stuff, at least for now, has become very easy with the advent of bunch of APIs, a bunch of different services. How does that change the market? Like now, almost anybody can sort of build something useful, right? So how does a product differentiate it from the others? Because if I wanted to build something, it'll take me like a week. If at least for the things that I know myself, if I had to build something, I can come out with an MVP in a week. But how do I make sure it differentiates from the other competitors? Because obviously because it's easier to build, a lot of people building it. So how to make sure it's better than the others?
So to answer your question, right? I think how VCs look at it is it's moats, right? What you have built, does it have some sort of a moat or a differentiation? And moat and differentiation can be different. They're not the same, right? So let's say you've built something. VCs try to figure out, does it have a tech moat or a product moat, or maybe a distribution or a GTM moat, or a model moat, some kind of a moat, right? That gives you an edge as opposed to others, right? If you don't have a moat, maybe you don't have a moat, right? Then do you have a differentiation? Right? Is it somewhat different as opposed to existing players, right? Even if it is not defensible, even if it doesn't have a moat, is it differentiated, right? Ideally, you would want to build something that is differentiated and defensible and has a moat, right? That's the sweet spot to be in. But so there is that, and there are different ways to build differentiation and have moats, right? You could build in a particular vertical, right? As opposed to building a horizontal platform. You can build in a certain vertical, and you can have a moat in that particular vertical because you have those networks and you've built around that particular use case, so it becomes a lot more valuable. Right? So that's how you see it. So because it has become very easy to build products now, right? Product moats really, they do not exist.
Right? They don't exist.
Right? You need to have either a tech moat, right? You build some proprietary technology, right? Which is difficult. If it is proprietary, I'm assuming it is difficult to build, most likely. Right? Or you have some sort of other moats, right? Like maybe GTM or some network effects, something like that.
Very interesting. What do you think about?
Also,
sure.
Yes, especially if you're building for the India market, companies, especially in the B2C space, which have offline and online both built into them, both components built into them, they have generally, bigger moats, right? It's difficult to replicate that, right? You take the example of a Swiggy or a Zomato, right?
Yeah.
They have,
makes sense,
right? The physical and the online is both linked, right? So once a player already exists in the market and they have they have built a network of they already have a supply on their platform, and then they already have a bunch of drivers who are on the road delivering the food items. It becomes difficult for a new player to come in and take that from them because there is only so much supply. Right?
Makes sense. From what I'm gauging is you're saying if a product is able to grab the attention both in the digital and the physical world, it is doing something right. There's some kind of a mode there. Very interesting. Okay, so yesterday I put up a story asking are there any questions from the audience for someone from the VC space, and I have a couple. I'll take the names and then you can choose to answer them. Okay, so first question is from Atharva who asks, how do you calculate TAM? What resources / websites you use to get the macroeconomical data?
I don't know if I'll be able to answer this as accurately as some other people in my team can, but I'll take a shot, right? So TAM is basically total addressable market, right? So take a use case, right? Let's say you're trying to calculate the TAM of, just give me a minute, let me think of a good example.
Sure. What about the stock market space?
I want to go with stock market. Let me think if I'll be able to do justice to that.
Sure.
Let's go with the recruitment space. I think it's because it's easy for me to. Right? So let's say you're trying to size the recruitment market, right? So what you'll do essentially is you will look at let's say you're building for the tech product space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're trying to sell to tech product companies, right? And you're specific to tech product hiring. You would look at all the companies in the market. Let's say for our use case, you're just specific to India, right? You look at all the companies who hire techies and product managers, right?
Mm-hmm.
You will try to come up with some sort of an estimate on the number of people that are hired, right, for these roles every year, right? And you would also look at how much money you would make from every candidate that you help hire for these, right? And then once you have that number, right, you can multiply that number with the average money that you will charge for every hire that you give to these companies, right? So that could give you some sort of size of the market, right? So this is an intuitive way of doing it. If you're looking to size markets, there are certain, if you want certain sources to basically get this data from, right? Let's say you want to understand how big is the fintech space in India, let's say, or let's say wallet market in India, or let's say the lending, let's say you want to size the lending market in India, right? So you can go to platforms like Traction, right? And there are a lot of other platforms that I'm not recalling the names of, where you can find a lot of data for you to size the market.
Very interesting. Okay, I think this might answer this question very well. Next is, okay, this is a little bit of, okay, this is what are seed rounds and stages in a startup? Like in a very intuitive way, I believe, like a question for someone who's never heard of the venture space, like for that.
So
seed this is from Amrit, by the way. Yes.
Yeah. So seed stage is basically the first money in a company, right? That's when you're seeding your startup, when you're starting when you're starting your company. So that's seed capital. So there are some VC funds who invest in the seed stage, and to get money at the seed stage, people raise money at the seed stage without having a product. So pre-product raise money at the seed stage. Some people raise money after building the product. So, but pre-revenue, they don't have revenues, but they have a product and they have some sort of attraction stage to raise seed money as well. And then some people raise seed money after having some revenue. So it's not really fixed on when to raise the seed money, right? It depends, but generally the seed stage is the first money in, and then you have your Series A, which then some people raise pre-series between seed and Series A to bridge the gap, right? But Series A is when you kind of have a product market fit. When you have a scalable product market fit is when you are in a position to raise Series A. And that is when a lot of people say that you've arrived, and where you're raising. So seed stage could be like anywhere from 500K to up to 5 million these days, right? And Series A could be from 10 million to people have raised up to 40, 50 million, right?
Makes sense.
And then you have further round Series B, Series C, Series D, right, where VCs invest, right? So there are a lot of VCs who are doing early stage, and there are a lot of VCs who do late growth stage and late stage, and then there are VCs who are doing investing at all stages, so multi-stage investing. And after your Series C, Series D, and Series E, you have your private equity players who come in and then invest in, right, companies of large sizes, right, established companies. That is where private equity comes in. And then you have your public markets when the company goes public. So that's how investing works.
Interesting. That's all from the audience side. I want to get into AI now. Like as a VC, you're seeing the AI wave. You're seeing it from the economical perspective, from the user market perspective. Basically, you have like a bird, like an eagle eye view of the market. What's your general like notion about AI? Like the way it's progressing. Where do you see things going?
I think ChatGPT has like really changed the landscape now, right? It has what used to be tech modes, right, do not exist anymore, right?
Makes sense.
So that has changed, right? So a lot of AI companies that we get are essentially building wrappers.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right. So they might be building something valuable, like in a space, but the question that we ask is, what is the moat here, right? Because anyone can build it, right? So again, that we come back to differentiation and moat, come back to that question of differentiation and moat, right? So that is there, AI AI is going to basically replace, change. It is changing a lot of things, and it will change a lot of things, right? A lot of the need for manpower is going to significantly reduce in a lot of industries, which is reducing, and it will further accelerate. It will not replace, right? But it will significantly reduce the need for manpower, right? And it is happening from the lowest of the industries to the highest of the industries, right? You see that happening in the VC industry as well, right? You see that happening in every industry.
Very interesting. So how is in what ways as VCs are you using AI in your general day-to-day VC tasks?
As I said, we're building a product. We're building an internal product, a
Internal
SaaS tool.
product,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, in order to automate. Yeah.
To basically reduce the need of number of analysts or associates required in a VC fund, right? So generally what VCs do can be divided into 3 to 4 parts, right? What a VC does is, number one, sourcing, right? Deal flow. The second thing is due diligence, right?
Yeah.
The third is portfolio management, right? Once you've decided to invest, you help your portfolio, right? And then there is LP management as well, but which is basically, we raise money from partners, right? That is different. Let's keep that aside. So in these 3 things, a lot of things are being optimized. So specifically the sourcing part, the deal flow part. Not till date, I think a couple of years back, right? Most VC funds were limited to their networks, right? Limited to the networks of their team, the partners and other people in the team, to source deals, to find deals, right?
Makes sense.
And they were limited to what the analyst or associates could find.
Sure.
Right? Now what is happening is people have started to understand that that's a very limited way of doing things. We need to, there is a need to productize it, right? So, and hence a lot of funds now have started building products where the sourcing now happens through a platform, and people have started doing data crawlers, and people have figured out from where to scrape data to make sure that you don't miss out on founders and startups. So that is one part how VC workflow is being automated. Then there is the due diligence part, where a lot of intelligence is being built into products, where you look at a lot of data points to rank founders, markets, right, to help our team intelligence in a much better way, right? So a lot of it.
Very interesting. Yeah, about rappers again, right? So I think the only reason why I'm so interested in looking at rappers is because it shows what all is possible. Because natively, just the API or just bare bones structure of ChatGPT, I mean, you don't really, generally people might not know what all is possible, but once and for all, rappers come out, you see where the horizon ends, which is nowhere. Because I think when I looked at, do you know what Julius.ai does? It does. It sort of it takes an Excel sheet and can sort of chat with an Excel sheet. It makes its own pictorial representations of the data. It can find out very interesting patterns in the data and whatnot. So it's just a wrapper, but it's very useful. And a lot of companies have adopted the same thing. They're trying to work with data as well, right? So
I'll tell you one interesting thing with with what has happened with GPT and AI now. Since building wrapper around GPT has become easy, right? So there is an opportunity in the market to build tech products which are product-led growth driven, right? So you could build a tool. You could build a tool which is essentially a wrapper around GPT for a particular use case. Let's say you're building for a particular use case in a particular market, right? And you launch that to a critical mass, to a community, and you understand your end user. It becomes easy for you to get that critical mass onto your platform, and for you to get traction. It has become easier, right? So the opportunity in the market to build a product for a particular use case and get traction on that is easier as compared to what was 5 years back, because GPT allows you to build on a lot of use cases that were not possible before. Even if you don't have a significant moat or differentiation.
There's a company which sort of runs on the same thing, right? It's built by Arvind Sharma. It's called Induced, if you have heard of it.
No.
So it's basically replacing all the back offices. It's like a headless employee that you have. It has its own browser, and the way it works so let's say basic back office things, right? Maybe book flights for XYZ person from here to here, book this, book that, invoices and whatnot. So it works on the way web pages are designed, which is very interesting. So the way it works is it's not their own proprietary technology. They're using several other APIs for that. But funnily, it's working on the fact on how uniform the web is. So if you look at any good booking website for let's say flights, right? They have a very similar way things are designed. And funnily, it works on the way things are commented out in the React code and in the HTML code, which is like sort of publicly available, which is sort of replacing almost every back office job, and it's significantly cheaper. I mean, you should look at it at least once, like the induced AI thingy. And yeah, I think and probably that's the future. It was at the end of the day, why would you want a back office which you need to instruct daily?
Right. Yeah, so I think GPT is basically is kind of a platform. I compared GPT with like an app store, right? Where when the app store came along, when iPhone was launched, and app came along, and then Google built Android and Play Store came along. With the app store, a lot of entrepreneurs got the opportunity of building a lot of businesses on the app store and on the Play Store, right? They were building apps and a lot of different business models. So there couldn't have been an Uber if there was no app store, right?
Sure.
Correct. So I see GPT like in the same GPT or other LLMs, right? In the same space, right? So these LLMs will give entrepreneurs a lot of opportunity to build a lot of products that were not possible before.
For sure. I think it's the same way how sort of Apple is doing, right? So the way they launched their own developer suite for VR. They have given almost like an entire empty app store for developers to build something in that space, which is very interesting. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it from my side. Are there any things that are left to be covered? I believe not. Are there any questions from your end to me, like after this conversation?
No, yes, I don't think I have. So when do you plan to make this live?
This will go live in like 2 days, 2 to 3 days. Like once like the clips are ready and whatnot. Once like we are ready to push out a bunch of content in different media. So yeah, this will get ready. Like the entire podcast will be ready by tomorrow evening at max. Sure. So that's that. For sure. So any last 3 pieces of advice, like a generic closing statement for a podcast listener? Like what do you want to say to these guys before leaving?
Yes, I generally refrain from giving advice. Right?
Interesting.
Because
any closing notes, if I would like to phrase it in that way?
Closing notes on what? You want me to like?
Okay, let's founders building products that they love.
I think I think Indian founders specifically should be a little more ambitious as opposed to what I see generally, right? Most of the founders want to build something incrementally better, right? I'm not saying is wrong, right? It can be right in the stage you are in your life and what you want out of your life, right? But we need, especially this country needs, a bunch of entrepreneurs who are really ambitious and were trying to build products and businesses that create significant value, right? And who push the envelope forward, right? So I think founders should be a little more ambitious and original. Originality is the more rare thing right now. Yes, right. There are smart people in the ecosystem. A lot of smart founders. VCs are generally smart. A lot of smart people everywhere, but originality is very rare. And I think originality builds large outcomes, not smartness. Smartness is the necessary condition, but it's not the solution.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Nipun. It's been a great time.
Thank you, Yash.